Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Today I brought for you all February-March 2026 9708 variant 12. We will be solving MCQs for AS level today. Let's see what this paper has brought for us today. Moving forward, MCQ number 1. MCQ number 1 says, what is not a reward to a factor of production? Now we all know there are four factor payments: rent, interest, profit in wages, right? Interest for capital, rent for land, wages to labor, and profit to entrepreneur. So the odd one out is transfer payments. Easy. So for one, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. And we all know what are transfer payments? Any money or benefit given by the government, but there's no exchange for goods and services, right? Like it could be pensions, it could be unemployment benefits, right? So it's not a reward. A reward is again certain rendering of services, right? All right, moving forward, MCQ number 2. MCQ number 2 says a worker in a furniture factory currently works 10 hours a day. So initially he's working 10 hours. In the diagram, WX is the worker's initial PPC. So WX is the initial PPC. This is the initial PPC, right? So this is the initial PPC. So if you look at the PPC, initially he was making 10 tables per day, and the horizontal axis displays chairs. So he was making 20 chairs per day. So he was making 10 tables and 20 chairs, right? Now what happened? Now they're saying there are certain changes in the factory that cause the PPC to shift to YZ. Now the PPC shifted to YZ. Now if the PPC shifted to YZ, what happened? Now this person is making or producing 8 tables and 24 chairs. So now it's 8 tables and 24 chairs. And now what's the PPC? It's YZ. Now what are they asking? Now they're giving us a table. What will be the workers' hours per day and productivity as a result of these changes in the furniture factory, assuming that the worker is on the new PPC? Now assuming that the worker is on YZ, they are asking what could be the hours per day and his productivity as per how many tables and chairs he's producing per hour. So now we know the total output he's producing. We know that he is making how much? He's making 8 tables and 24 chairs. So now, but we don't know about the total number of hours he worked. Now, if he's making 8 tables, if you look at the first column, you can have 8 over here if either he's working for 10 hours and you multiply 10 into 0.8, or you multiply 8 into 1. These are the only two possible ways he could be making 8 tables per day if he is on the PPC YZ. But what about chairs? He was making 24 chairs, right? So if you look at option B, it would be a 10 into 2 would be a 20 chairs. But he's not making 20 chairs, he's making 24 chairs. So this means it was 8 hours into 3 that was making him produce 24 chairs. It's option D. That means he was working for 8 hours. That is why he was producing 8 tables and it caused him to produce 24 chairs. So for number 2, we'll shade in D as our response. Moving forward, MCQ number 3. MCQ number 3 says, why is choice central to the economic problem? So why do you think that choice is a part of economic problem? Economic problem is what? Scarcity. When you've got scarce resources, and that makes us to decide. Now, why do we decide? Because resources are scarce, because resources have alternative uses. So it's pretty straightforward. We can shade in C as our answers. It cannot be A because it says different governments have different objectives. Firms have access to unlimited resources. No resources are limited. People wants are limited. People wants are unlimited. So this is incorrect. This is incorrect. This is incorrect. So 3 has to be C. Number 4. Ravi is a public sector worker. All right. So he works in any government office or a public organization. Right now, he visits the subsidized state-owned cafeteria daily to purchase mangoes, apples, and bananas for 80 rupees and then shares his food with Anushka. What is the most likely classification of these goods? Now, he is buying goods on his own. So that means what? It has to be private goods. So it cannot be public goods because public goods is what? Talks about two broad features, non-excludability and non-liability. It's not being provided by state, he's paying for that, right? So you can chop A and B straightforward. So it has to do something with the private goods. And what is he purchasing? He's purchasing fruits, so that are supposed to be healthier, good for health. So that has to be merit goods. It's not free, right? Because he's paying for it. So it has to be D. So for 4, we'll shade in D as our correct response. Easy. Number 5. In the diagram, the original PPC is LM. So LM is the initial PPC curve. Now what happened? What would cause the curve to shift to NP? Now the entire PPC curve shifted inwards. Now the vertical axis displays the consumer goods, the horizontal axis displays the capital goods. Now they're asking how or why did the entire PPC shifted inwards from LM to NP? Now what happened? A fall in the working population, a reallocation of resources from consumer goods to capital goods, an increase in output per worker, an increase in unemployment. If and there would have been an increase in output per worker, so the PPC would have shifted outward and not inwards. So it's not C. An increase in unemployment. If unemployment would have risen, so we would have moved inside the curve, but it would not have caused the curve to shift. It would have pointed towards inefficiency, right? But the curve would not have shifted. So the curve shifts either because there is a decrease in the quantity or a decrease in the quality of factors of production, right? So there is a decrease in the productive potential of the economy. B says a reallocation of resources. If there would have been a reallocation of resources from consumer goods to capital goods, so that means we would have been producing less of consumer goods and more of capital goods by being on the same PPC, not a shift. It cannot be B. It's a fall in the working population. That means there is a reduction in the quantity of labor. So the working population, there is a fall, maybe net immigration increase, or maybe the retirement age decreased that caused the working population to fall. So for 5, it is A. Moving forward, MCQ number 6. MCQ number 6 is what is cross elasticity of demand? We all know cross elasticity of demand is percentage change in quantity demanded of good A or product A upon percentage change in price of product B, right? So what does it measure? It measures the responsiveness of quantity demanded for one product following a change in the price of another product. So now keeping that definition in mind, what is the correct option? Responsiveness of price of good X to a change in demand of good Y? No. The responsiveness of quantity demanded of a good to a change in its own price? No. That's price elasticity of demand. C says the responsiveness of quantity demanded of good X to a change in quantity of good Y. No, it has to be price in the denominator. So it is D, where the responsiveness of quantity demanded for good X to a change in the price of good Y. So we'll shade in D as the correct answer. Number 7. Number 7 says an increased demand for cars leads to an increased demand for steel. Now what had happened? The demand for cars had increased. Now, what did it cause? It caused the demand for steel to rise because steel is what? A key raw material, which best describes this relationship between cars and steel. It cannot be substitute because substitutes is what? When instead of that product, you're consuming certain other product, right? Which satisfies the same needs. That's not a substitute. Complements is where the use of one derives the use of another, right? It's not complement. It's a derived demand. That means it's where something is required because it's needed for the production of other goods and services. It's not joint supply. It has to be derived demand. So 7 it's C. Number 8. The diagram shows the demand for and supply of electric cars. So now it's displaying a demand and a supply diagram. The vertical axis displays price, the horizontal displays the quantity. Now what are they saying? The government implements a subsidy for electric cars. So now if the subsidy is there, what happened? The supply rose. So from S1, it came to S2. Guessing which area represents the size of consumer surplus. For those willing to buy electric cars, the price is P2. So now notice what happened. The price fell from P1 to P2. So now they are saying what is the consumer surplus. So what is consumer surplus? Consumer surplus is the difference between the market price and what the consumer is actually willing to pay. So now if you notice the market price is P2 and the consumer was willing to pay go up to this much price. So now this entire region TUVW TUVW is consumer surplus. That means the consumer is better off by this amount after the subsidy is being placed. So it's TUVW. So for 8, we'll shade in B as our correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 9. MCQ number 9 says, how might a firm raise the value of price elasticity of supply for its product? We know price elasticity of supply is percentage change in quantity supplied divided by percentage change in price. So, if the producer wants to increase the price elasticity of supply, wants to increase the responsiveness to which he responds to changes in price, so he has to be elastic. He has to be responding to quickly changes in the price, and that can only be done once he has either stocks of raw materials or whether he has stocks of unfinished goods so that he could quickly respond to those changes, right? So that could only be possible if he has sufficient stocks available. So if he has sufficient productive capacity, he could add stocks and quickly respond, right? So let's look at the options. A says decrease the amount of labor that employs. So if he reduces employment, if he reduces the labor, he would not be able to quickly respond, right? It would reduce his capacity. B says employ new technology to increase its productive capacity. Yes, that's correct, because if he employs new technology, he will be able to expand and increase and improve upon price elasticity of supply. C says increase advertising expenditure to generate more revenue. That would be creating demand and not supply. Reduce the level of stocks. If you reduce the level of stocks, again, he would not be able to improve upon PES, rather decrease PES. So it's not C, it's not D, it's not A. It has to be B, where using better technology is going to help him improve upon PES. Moving forward, MCQ number 10. 10 says an economy is experiencing a fall in real GDP. So that means incomes are falling, real income is falling. Also, deflation has caused the price of four goods, A, B, C, and D, to each fall by 5%. Which good is likely to enjoy the largest increase in its sales revenue? Now, what is happening? They've displayed a table. They've displayed income elasticity of demand and they've displayed price elasticity of demand. Now, price elasticity of demand is percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price, right? So now what is happening? The inflation is falling and real income is also falling. Now they are asking which good is likely to experience the highest increase in its sales revenue, right? So now, if you look at the first part of the table, income elasticity of demand, now you'll notice negative signs and positive signs. So negative signs is denoting inferior goods. That means if now over here, since what was happening, there was a fall in the real GDP, so income was falling. So if income is falling, that means that the demand for this good is rising, right? So income is falling, demand is increasing. So now the negative signs denote that. So the higher the number, if it is greater than 1, that means what? It is income elastic. So if you want a high sales revenue, that means if incomes are falling and quantity demanded is increasing, that means for that product, you would be able to get the highest revenue. So in that case, it's D for income elasticity of demand. What about price elasticity of demand? Price elasticity of demand says, now over here prices were falling. So if prices are falling, quantity demanded should increase, right? So that means again these negative signs is showing that prices are falling, quantity demanded increase. But again, the highest number, if it is greater than 1, that denotes that it has got the strongest relationship, right? So 1.5, that's the highest figure over here, and 1.5, that's the highest figure over here. So this is the combination which will yield you the largest increase in sales revenue. So for D is the correct answer for this answer, for this MCQ. I hope it's clear. Number 11. What is the definition of a subsidy? A subsidy is what? These are direct payments made by governments to the producers of goods and services, right? So it's a payment made by the government to private sector firms for lowering their cost of production. As simple as that. It's not maximum price, it's not minimum price, it's not the removal of laws. If it's not A, it's not B, it's not D, it has to be C. For 11, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 12. MCQ number 12 says, what is not a reason for greater inequality in the distribution of income in an economy? That means there are 3 reasons that are causing disparity in income in an economy. That means the gap between the rich and the poor. 3 could be the reason except for 1. A lack of employment opportunity. That is a reason. But we do not want the reason. Decreased welfare payments. That is again a reason. But we do not want that. Poor vocational training. Again, that's a reason. If you don't provide training, again, people are going to be redundant and the gap between the rich and the poor is going to widen. So it's not B, it's not A, it's not D, because all 3 are the reasons that could be contributing towards a difference in the gap between the rich and the poor. It's C, increased progressive taxation. That means as people earn high, so the proportion of taxes increase, right? So progressive taxation would reduce the gap and not widen it. So for 12, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 13. MCQ number 13 says, the diagram shows a market where the government has set a minimum price of OM. So now OM is set above the equilibrium OP. Now they're saying what can be concluded from the diagram. At prices above OM, there would be a surplus of the good. Yes, that's the correct answer, because notice this is the supply and this is the demand. So this entire region is what? Excess supply. At the minimum price OM, there would be a shortage of the good. No, there's not a shortage of the goods. So it's not B. C, price will automatically fall. Price will not fall because the government has set that price. The minimum price will be ineffective. No, the minimum price is not ineffective because it is set above the equilibrium. That's where it should be. So A is the correct answer for MCQ number 13. Moving forward, MCQ number 14. MCQ number 14 says which type of road might be classified as a public good. So now we know in order for any good to classify as a public good, it has to have 2 key characteristics. And what are that? Non-excludability and non-rivalry. So we look at each option and keep these 2 key features in our mind, non-excludability and non-rivalry. That means you cannot exclude who is going to consume it from the other. And non-rivalry means that usage of one does not reduces the use for another consumer, right? So we have to include non-excludability and non-rivalry non-excludability and non-rivalry. Now, a road bridge that charges a toll to cross, so if it is charging a toll to cross, so that means non-excludability function is not being satisfied. You are excluding those from those who can pay from those who cannot pay. So it cannot be A. B says a road that is closed to traffic on some days. So if the road is closed for traffic on some days, again you are restricting. So that means you're not satisfying the characteristic of rivalry, right? So that means you are again excluding people from those who can consume it, so you're not satisfying this. It cannot be C, a road that is congested during peak periods. If the road is congested during peak period times, so this means some of them could be using that road and the others might not be able to pass through that road. So again, you are restricting it. So it would not satisfy the characteristic of rivalry, right? So non-rivalry would not be satisfied because you are not everybody would be able to use that road. It's D, where a road that is used by very few vehicles, right? So very few vehicles are using it, but still it's available for all, right? So it has to be D. So the closest option that satisfies the public good in this MCQ is D. So 14 will shade in D as our correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 15. MCQ number 15 says governments are trying to reduce the burden of transfer payments in economies with an aging population. So now the government has a lot of population that is aging below the retirement age. Now, what is happening? It wants to reduce the burden of transfer payments. It wants to reduce the amount it pays to people as pensions, right? Which policy would help to achieve this aim? Now, if it wants to reduce, it has to raise the retirement age. That is the only way it could lessen the burden of pensions, right? So, for 15, we'll shade in C as our correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 16. Now, this displays the circular flow of income. We talk about withdrawals and we talk about injections. Now, they have numbered certain boxes and they are asking what do these boxes represent. Now, they are saying what do the numbers represent on the diagram. Now, the inside circle you notice talks about factor services, it talks about households, it talks about goods and services, it talks about funds. So, what could be one? It could be factor payments. So, it could either be A, B, or C if you look at the table, the first part. So, it's not D. What about two? Now, T2 is what? Is it an injection or is it a withdrawal? It's an injection. So it could be what? Savings, investment, consumer spending, factor payments. It's not consumer spending because that's a withdrawal. It's not factor payments because that's already done. So it's not C, it's not D. What about savings and investment? It has to be an injection. That means so it's a investment. Third part, goods and services. Over here, it has to be consumer spending. And for fourth, again, it's a withdrawal, so it's a saving. So it has to be factor payments for one, investment for number two, consumer spending for three, and saving for fourth. So we'll shade in B as the correct answer. I hope it's clear. Moving forward, MCQ number 17. An individual was temporarily unemployed but found a job. So if he was struggling in between two jobs, so the time period for that period, if he was unemployed, what type of unemployment is that? Since it was for a short time and it was unemployment, temporary unemployed in between jobs, and that has to be frictional unemployment. So for 17, we'll shade in B as a correct answer. It's not cyclical, it's not seasonal, it's not structural. Structural is when there are structural changes, right? It cannot be because of structural changes in the economy. It cannot be cyclical because that's of for lack of aggregate demand. It's not seasonal because we're not talking about certain seasons. All right. Moving forward, MCQ number 18. MCQ number 18 talks about real GDP at basic prices for two countries, country X and country Y. They talked about two parts, two variables in the table. They talk about real GDP at basic prices and service sector as a percentage of real GDP. So country X employs 60% of its population in service and country Y 20%. Country X is enjoying a real GDP of $500 billion. It's higher than country Y, which was 200. Now they're saying what is the most likely reason for the differences in the real GDP. So now what would be the correct answer for this MCQ? Country X is a higher level of subsidies. You can't say there's no data like that. B says country X has a higher rate of inflation. Again, the rates of inflation is not given. They're given as real rate or GDP rate. Rate of inflation is no statistics available. C says country X has a higher spending on agriculture than country Y. Country X, 60% of the population is in the tertiary sector, in the service sector. So you cannot say they are spending high on agriculture. Most majority of the population is employed in the service sector, so it's not C. Country X has a higher value of final output than country Y. Yes, that could be because standard of living is supposedly high because it is enjoying a higher real GDP, and also because a majority of the population is in the service sector, so they could be earning more, and the real value or the real incomes are high. So for 16, it has to be D. Which she didn't D as the correct answer. Sorry, for 18, it has to be D. It's MCQ number 18. Number 19. What will not shift the vertical part of the long run aggregate supply curve? So now why do you think the aggregate supply curve would not be shifting, right, in the long run? Why do you think it would be inelastic? A fall in factor prices, immigration of skilled labor, improved education and training, and technological advancement. So you see, B, C, and D can all cause the aggregate supply curve to shift in the long run, because if more people are going to pour into the country, or education and training improves, or technological advancement occurs, so the supply would increase. But it's the fall in the factor prices that would not cause. All will cause an increase, but a fall in factor prices will cause a decrease in the productive potential of the economy, right? We are talking about all the factors that would affect the PPC. So notice B, C, and D will all cause an increase in the PPC except for A. So for A, 19 will shade in A as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 20. MCQ number 20 talks about different years. From 21 to 24, they've displayed the rate of inflation. Now notice the rate of inflation was 3, then it went to 2, then it went to a negative 1, then it went to a 0.5. They say which statement is correct. Disinflation occurred, prices decreased, prices were the lowest, prices were higher. So now notice, even though the rate of inflation was falling, but there was still inflation, right? So what could we say? It's not B, it's not C, it's not D, right? Because even though the rate of falling, but prices were still rising at a slower pace than before, right? So this means we could say that disinflation occurred in 22. The rate of inflation fell in 2022 from 3 to 2, right? Prices decreased between 21 and 22. Prices were still rising, so it's not B. Prices were at their lowest in 23. Prices, it was, prices were negative. It was, right? Prices were higher in 21 than in 23. Again, no, prices were still rising. It's not B, it's not C, it's not D, it has to be A. That means the rate of inflation fell. So for 20, we'll sheet in A as our correct answer. 21. Which policy mainly deals with managing public finances? So when we are talking about managing public finances, it has to be fiscal policy. We are talking about government expenditure. 21 has to be B. Monetary policy talks about money supply. Supply side policy talks about increasing the productive potential. It's not environment as well. 22 says what is not a supply side policy measure. So that means 3 would be supply side policy measures except for 1. Deregulating industry to encourage competitive markets, linking unemployment benefits, tackling cyclical slump, tackling structural unemployment. It's not A because we are talking about deregulating the industry. That is a supply side policy measure. B is again a supply side policy measure. D is again A supply side policy measure. It's C, where we are talking about interest rates, we are talking about monetary policy. So for 22, we'll shade in C as a correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 23. Monetary policy can be used to increase the level of business activity. Which action illustrates this? So out of these four options, which is the action that's talking about monetary policy? That means expansionary monetary policy. So which could be expansionary monetary policy, which money supply increases or the interest rates falls? A says curbing consumption through controls on credit. That means if you're controlling credit, so you are decreasing money supply. So it cannot be A. B says easing credit regulation for banks to increase lending. Yes, that's correct because you are increasing money supply. Reducing government spending with fiscal policy, stimulating company investment by increasing interest rates. If you're increasing interest rate, that's talking about contractionary monetary policy. So it's not C, it's not D, it has to be B. 23 will shade in B. 24 says there's an increase in the income of individuals. If incomes are increasing in an economy, which of the following shows a regressive tax system? That means people who are earning less would be paying more. The amount of income tax phase remains unchanged. The marginal income tax rate exceeds the average tax rate. The income tax rate remains unchanged. The income tax rate rises. If income tax rate rises, that would not be regressive. Regressive is punishing those who are earning less, right? So a higher proportion is being paid by those. C says the income tax rate remains unchanged. So if the income tax remains unchanged, still if you are earning high, you would be paying less, right? You're talking about regressive. Regressive is where the amount of income tax remains unchanged. That means now if you're earning high, you're still paying that small proportion. So it has to be A. Moving forward, MCQ number 25. Which combination classifies expansionary fiscal policy and its impact? Expansionary fiscal policy is when you are increasing government expenditure or you are reducing taxes. So now, if you are increasing government expenditure, that means increase welfare spending. And when you are going to do that, what's going to happen? Your spending is going to be greater than your earnings or the taxes earned. So the budget deficit would increase. You'd be spending more. So that would be the impact. 25, it has to be B. Moving forward, MCQ number 26. 26 says what would cause an immediate increase in the deficit in the country's balance of payment? What would cause an immediate deficit in the balance of payment current account? All right. So we are talking about exports and imports. So it's not A because A talks about a rise in government expenditure on education. That's talking about budgets. B says a rise in the cost of imported raw materials used in domestic production. Yes, that's correct because if that raw material is used as a key ingredient for the production of goods in the home country, that would cause an immediate deficit because imports would rise relative to exports. So it has to be B. We'll shade in B for 26. All right. 27. What must be true for a country whose terms of trade deteriorate? Terms of trade is where value of export prices is expressed as a proportion of value of import prices. So ratio of export prices upon ratio of import prices. Now they're saying it's deteriorating. That means it's worsening. So exports fall faster than imports. Export prices fall more slowly. Export prices rise more slowly than import prices. That's the correct answer. That means that the value of exports fell or the value of exports rose more slowly than import prices. That is why it deteriorated. For 27, we'll shade in C as a correct answer. Deteriorate means worsened. 28. Country X and country Y both produce and trade in Z. Now, they are both producing and they both exchange that. What may cause a reduction in the quantity supplied by domestic producers of goods Z in country X? Now, why do you think producers in country X are now supplying less of goods Z? A quota on imports of goods Z into country X, a subsidy on exports of goods Z from country Y, a tariff on imports of goods Z into country X, or extra regulations on imports of goods into country X. It cannot be A, it cannot be B, it cannot be D because they're all talking about it cannot be A, it cannot be C, it cannot be D, right? All right. Why? Because here we are talking about local goods are exported, so less would be supplied by domestic uh, producers. That is why there is a reduction in the quantity supplied by producers of goods in country X. So if there is a subsidy on exports of goods from country Y, so producers are exporting more of that good, and there is locally less of that product available. So for 28, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. 29. To what is a depreciation of a country's exchange rate most likely to lead? So if the country's exchange rate is depreciating, what would it cause? Depreciation would make exports cheap and imports expensive, right? So it cannot be B, it cannot be C, it cannot be D. It would cause a decrease in inflationary pressure because exports would be cheaper and imports would be expensive. So the economy would be better off, right? So for 29, it has to be, uh, no, let's read the question again. To what is the depreciation of a country's exchange rate likely to lead? It would, if the country's exchange rate is depreciating, so exports would be cheap and imports would be expensive. And as a result, there would be an increase in the real GDP. The real GDP would increase. It would increase the inflationary pressure. The inflationary pressure would increase, so that's why it cannot be A decrease in the relative price of food, no, the prices of imports are rising because the country's exchange rate is depreciating. C, increase in cyclical unemployment, we cannot talk about that in this case. The real GDP would increase. Why? Because the exports would get cheap and there would be an increase in exports, and the imports would fall because there would be a fall in imports. So it has to be D because the people are going to be better off. So 29, it has to be D. My bad. MCQ number 30. 30 talks about export of goods and import of goods, primary income and secondary income. What we'll do, we'll calculate export of goods and import of goods balance of trade. So it has to be a -5. We'll add -5 to a 7 and a -4 in order to derive the value of the current account, because this talks about balance of trade, primary income, secondary income, all talks about these four components, and the value we'll get is a -$2 billion. So that means it has to be B. So for 30, we'll shade in B. I hope you understood